Chapter 20. A Grateful Witch. After the first outburst of anger by Miss Carmino and Mr. Strong, there was silence in the besieged cabin. Louise and Jean felt responsible for the imprisonment of the four, since it was the sisters' search for Baron that had brought them to Lost Lake. For the moment, the Danas were nonplussed. How could they figure out a means of escape? Baron broke the silence by barking loudly. He bounded over and placed his paws against the door, as if to frighten the men or to signal that he wanted to go outside and fight them. "No, Baron," said Mr. Strong. "You'd be shot in a minute even if we could let you out." He paced the floor. "Why, oh, why did I ever allow you girls to get into this predicament?" Louise and Jean looked out the window again at the man holding the rifle. This time his hat was pushed back, and he had lowered his weapon. Now Louise exclaimed, "It's Sam Reinhardt!" "And I think," Jean added, "that the man outside the door is Ben Hopley. I believe he was trying to disguise his voice, but it still sounded like him." Miss Carmino spoke up in a whisper. "Perhaps if we wait until evening, I can slip out the window and go for help." Mr. Strong shook his head vigorously. "That will be my job." Jean reminded the others that darkness was a long way off. It was just possible that their captors had a whole gang of men already digging at the site of the landslide. "Too bad we didn't hear them sneak up when we were talking about the hidden cave." Blanche Carmino groaned, then set her jaw firmly. "They must not find it," she said. "I'm going to stop those men if I have to." Before she could finish the sentence, a series of shots rang out on the mountainside. The group in the cabin was mystified. Were the thieves having a fight among themselves? A moment later, a loud, stern voice commanded, "Put up your hands!" The Danas rushed to the window and were just in time to see several deputy sheriffs ride in on horseback. Among them was Deputy Alt. In a short time, they had rounded up Sam Reinhardt and Ben Hopley, then Chet Simpson and Sally Reinhardt, who had already started digging. There was no one with them. As soon as the rifles of the three men had been taken from them and the rope tie cut from the door, Louise and Jean rushed from the cabin with Miss Carmino, Mr. Strong, and Baron. The girls spoke at once to Deputy Alt. "So you have been prisoners," he said. "Your aunt was afraid that might happen." "Our Aunt Harriet Dana?" Louise gasped. "Yes," said the deputy sheriff. "She suddenly recalled that Antonio Carmino had been a famous sculptor. She guessed then that the secret of Lost Lake might concern work of his buried here. If so, and the horse thieves were after it, they might take any kind of measures to keep you away from this spot." "And they did!" Jean exclaimed. The Danas felt so proud of their aunt. "I can't wait to give her a big hug and thank you," said Louise. "She really came to our rescue. By the way, this is our missing dog." "You found him? Great!" As the deputy sheriff quizzed his prisoners, the girls learned that Ben Hopley was a self-styled artist and sculptor, but had never been able to make an honest living at his profession. He had resorted to stealing anything he could sell. Chet Simpson turned out to be an agent for art dealers with shady reputations. Mrs. Reinhardt was his sister. Her husband, who proved to be the real brains of the outfit, had come across a clue in New York City that some valuable works of Antonio Carmino might be buried at Lost Lake. Miss Carmino identified Hopley and Simpson as the men who had tried to steal Baron and had threatened her if she did not reveal her secret. The Reinhardts she pointed out as the couple involved in both nefarious schemes. "I'm glad we got here before they carried out their plans," Deputy Alt replied. He turned to the Danas. "This has been a challenging mystery for you girls. You should have all the credit for solving it. Would you like to ask these prisoners any questions?" Louise nodded and spoke to Ben Hopley. "Was it you who carved the petroglyph of the old woman with the man sneaking up behind her and planning to knock her out with a shovel?" "Yes, I did that, but Reinhardt made me. Chet and I were casing this territory. Sam and Sally were waiting. They told us that when everything was ready for them to close in on the witch without anybody being around, I was to chip out that petroglyph as a signal. Then you butted in." "Who," Jean asked, "spoke those mysterious words, 'Get the witch,' and 'beautiful artwork'?" Startled, the thieves looked at one another before answering, but finally Sally Reinhardt spoke up. "Sam did. I didn't know anybody could hear us." "There's an echoing rock wall," said Louise. "It proved to be a good clue for us. How about the cabin where we found you?" "We were all set up at that cabin, stocked it, and even brought kerosene lanterns to masquerade as lost hunters. Then you had to come barging in. You've been the cause of nothing but trouble for us." Sam Reinhardt confessed they had planned to steal all 3 horses so that Mr. Strong and the girls would have to trek home. "But you were too quick for us," he told the rancher, hatred in his eyes. Louise and Jean learned that the Reinhardts had driven from New York in their car. They had kept it hidden a good part of the time in a box canyon outside of Huntersville. They had used the stolen ranch horses when traveling through the mountains. "Did you also steal a horse from an archaeologist working in the ruined Indian cliff dwellings?" Louise queried. "Yes," Reinhardt answered. "You'll find all of them at Round Table Butte. But it was Simpson who was spying on you and let you see him. Pretty dumb." The remark angered Chet Simpson. "Me dumb?" he cried out. "You were a fool to call out a fake warning to the girls and Mr. Strong in that canyon and then shoot an arrow. You sure alerted them." It was further revealed by the thieves that Hopley and Simpson had formerly lived in New York, but were now residents of San Francisco. They knew the Lost Lake area thoroughly from various trips to it. They usually used stolen horses in their travels. Ben Hopley had stayed in the cave and had lost a letter from a friend warning him about the Reinhardts. He and Simpson had separated, Chet to trail the ranch group, and Ben Hopley to go ahead and try to scare them into turning back. All the prisoners had been handcuffed, and now Deputy Alt was ready to have them mount horses and be taken to jail. Louise stepped forward. "Sir," she said, "you have so many men here. Couldn't all of us take a little time to dig and try to find the buried statues?" The deputy sheriff seemed a bit startled by this request. Before he could answer, Miss Carmino, whose eyes were sparkling with excitement, said quickly, "I have plenty of picks and shovels and spades if you could possibly spare the time." Suddenly the law officer laughed. "I think it's a splendid idea," he said to Louise. Deputy Sheriff Alt appointed one of his men to stand guard while the group followed Miss Carmino to the spot where she thought her father's cave workshop had been. Blanche Carmino suggested that they dig in a circular area about 5 feet apart. 15 minutes went by with no success, then 30. Mr. Strong called out, "I think we should take a rest period." "Wait a second," Jean cried excitedly. "Louise and I have just struck something." The others rushed to the spot. Before they could reach the girls, a wooden door which the sisters had uncovered suddenly gave way at their feet. The Danas disappeared, as if swallowed up by the earth. Mr. Strong was terrified. He leaned over and peered into the yawning hole. "Louise! Jean!" he called. "Where are you? Are you all right?" "We're okay," Louise called back, to everyone's relief. "Please, send down a flashlight." The rancher got one from his saddlebag and dropped it into the pit. Louise turned on the beam and flashed it around. The sisters found that they had tumbled into a tunnel Now it began to ascend abruptly. Together, the girls walked forward. Suddenly, they stopped. The powerful light revealed a rock-walled cavern untouched by the landslide and preserved intact. "Look!" Jean cried. Ahead of the girls were 5 exquisitely carved statues. 2 were still standing, 3 lying on the floor of the cave. "They are priceless," Louise said in awe as she gazed at the figures of an Indian and a graceful antelope. Hurrying back to the doorway, the sisters reported their find. At once, Miss Carmino entered the cave, followed by Mr. Strong and several of the deputy sheriff's men. All gazed in admiration at Antonio Carmino's work, so long hidden from the world. Tears trickled down the cheeks of his daughter. "My father was a wonderful man and a great sculptor," she said. "His work should be displayed in museums so everyone can appreciate it. I will take these statues to New York and sell them." Louise and Jean clasped her hands and smiled. "And you will stay in New York yourself and have some fun, won't you?" Jean said. The artist looked at the sisters affectionately. "You girls have taught me a great lesson. I have wasted many years being a recluse, but now I shall try to make up for it. I want to prove to everyone here that I never have been a witch. I was a broken-hearted person, afraid of the world. You girls have restored my confidence." The group walked back through the tunnel that led from the cave. Only Deputy Sheriff Alt and 2 other men remained. He said the prisoners had already been taken away. "These men will stay here to guard the statues until they can be safely moved," he assured Miss Carmino. The Danas, though happy at the way everything had turned out, could not help but wonder if another mystery might come their way. It would, and soon. The mystery of the stone tiger. All this time, Baron had been frisking about. Louise and Jean realized that momentarily they had forgotten about him. It was fortunate for them that he had not run off again. Louise gave the dog a hug. "I guess you've had enough scares in these mountains and won't mind staying aboard the train to New York," she teased him. As Baron Otto von Neckar wagged his tail furiously and barked in response, Jean said, "Do you know, old fellow, it was really you who solved the secret of Lost Lake. It's just too bad you can't tell us one word about your adventures." Louise laughed. "We must send a telegram to Professor Nesbit and say, 'Mission accomplished.'" The end.